Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we share stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of perseverance. Today's story follows a bright young student whose love for learning is overshadowed by a teacher with a hidden agenda. When Jaden, a dedicated history enthusiast, faces unfair treatment, his mother steps in, not just as a parent, but as someone with the power to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. What unfolds is a journey of exposure, resilience, and lasting change that will leave you both moved and inspired. If you enjoy stories of justice, perseverance, and transformation, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from our community. The autumn sun bathed Jefferson High School in a golden glow as students hurried to their classrooms. Among them was Jaden Carter, a tall, lanky 16-year-old with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a stack of books in his hands. His strides were purposeful as he made his way to his favorite class, American history. For Jaden, history wasn't just another subject. It was a window into the world's complexities and the resilience of those who had come before him. Today, however, he walked with a sense of unease. His teacher, Ms. Karen Whitmore, had made it clear from day one that she didn't think much of him. Jaden couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but the sting of her constant criticism had become impossible to ignore. As he entered the classroom, the usual chorus of chatter and laughter fell into a dull murmur. Ms. Whitmore stood at the front of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the students like a hawk surveying its prey. Her pristine white blouse and pencil skirt were as rigid as her demeanor. "Take your seats," she said, her voice clipped. Jaden slid into his usual spot at the back, next to his best friend, Marcus. The two exchanged nods as Marcus whispered, "You ready for her to tear into us again?" Jaden chuckled nervously, but didn't reply. His latest assignment, a detailed essay on the civil rights movement, had been a labor of love. He had spent countless nights in the school library, poring over books and crafting an argument that he felt proud of. Ms. Whitmore began handing back the essays, her heels clicking against the floor. As she reached Jaden's desk, she placed his paper face down and said curtly, "We need to talk after class." Jaden's stomach dropped. He turned the paper over to see a large red D- scrawled across the top, followed by a terse comment, "Lacks depth and understanding." "What the?" Marcus whispered, glancing at Jaden's paper. "This is better than mine, and I got a B." Jaden's frustration bubbled beneath the surface, but he clenched his jaw and forced himself to stay calm. He had expected criticism, but this felt personal. He couldn't shake the feeling that Ms. Whitmore was determined to see him fail. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Jaden lingered as the other students filed out. Ms. Whitmore gestured for him to approach her desk. "Jaden," she began, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "Your work on this essay was underwhelming. I expected more from someone in an advanced class." "Ms. Whitmore, I worked really hard on this," Jaden said, his voice steady but firm. "I included multiple sources and even cited books from the library." "Effort isn't enough," she replied coldly. "You need to show me that you truly understand the material, not just regurgitate facts." Jaden's fists clenched at his sides. "But Marcus, I'm not discussing other students' work," Ms. Whitmore interrupted, her tone final. Jaden left the classroom, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the sense of injustice, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let this define him. At home that evening, Jaden sat at the kitchen table with his mother, Dr. Vanessa Carter. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of her homemade lasagna. Dr. Carter, a poised and intelligent woman with a commanding presence, listened intently as Jaden recounted his experience. "She just doesn't like me, Mom," Jaden said, his voice tinged with frustration. "No matter how hard I try, it's never enough for her." Dr. Carter frowned, her hands resting on the table. "This isn't the first time you've mentioned her unfair treatment. Do you think it's personal?" "I don't know," Jaden admitted, "but it feels like she's always looking for a reason to knock me down." Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed, a mix of concern and determination flickering in her gaze. "Let me handle this. There's a parent-teacher meeting coming up, and I'll be there. Don't worry, Jaden. Justice will prevail." Jaden nodded, comforted by his mother's confidence. Little did Ms. Whitmore know, Doctor. Carter wasn't just an ordinary parent. She was the new principal of Jefferson High School. The morning of the parent-teacher meeting arrived quickly. Jaden watched his mother leave the house with a quiet resolve. He had no idea what she planned to say, but he trusted her implicitly. As Dr. Carter approached the school, her heels clicked against the polished floor of the administration building. She had spent years advocating for equity and fairness in education, and she wasn't about to let her son, or any other student, be treated unfairly. The meeting with Ms. Whitmore loomed ahead, and Dr. Carter knew one thing for certain. This was about more than just a grade. As the bell rang for the start of the school day, Dr. Carter walked confidently toward Ms. Whitmore's classroom, ready to confront the teacher who had underestimated both her and her son. The small conference room was sterile and unwelcoming, its beige walls adorned with motivational posters that seemed ironic given the tension in the air. Dr. Carter sat at one end of the table, her posture impeccable. Across from her, Ms. Whitmore sat with a tight-lipped smile, her fingers clasped together as if she were bracing herself for battle. "Thank you for coming," Ms. Whitmore began, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I always appreciate parents who take an active interest in their child's education." Dr. Carter smiled politely. "I'm here because I want to understand why Jaden, who is an exceptional student, received such a low grade on his essay. I've reviewed his work, and it's clear to me that it meets and exceeds the criteria you outlined." Ms. Whitmore's expression hardened. "With all due respect, Dr. Carter, I believe Jaden struggles to grasp the nuances of the material. His writing lacks depth and critical analysis." Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting because I've spoken with several of Jaden's other teachers, and they all describe him as a standout student. They've even commended his analytical skills." Ms. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Well, each subject is different. History requires a certain rigor that Jaden has yet to demonstrate." Dr. Carter leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to see the rubric you used to grade his essay. Can you provide it?" Ms. Whitmore hesitated. "I'm afraid I don't have it on hand." "How convenient," Dr. Carter replied, her smile thin. "Perhaps we can discuss the broader pattern I've noticed in your grading. It seems that students of color in your classes consistently receive lower marks than their peers, even when their work is of equal or superior quality." Ms. Whitmore's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation, Doctor." "Carter, it's not an accusation," Dr. Carter said evenly. "It's an observation backed by data. As the new principal of this school, I've reviewed your records, and the disparities are impossible to ignore." The room fell silent. Ms. Whitmore's smug demeanor crumbled as the weight of Dr. Carter's words sank in. "I'm not just here as Jaden's mother," Dr. Carter continued. "I'm here as the principal of Jefferson High School, and I'm launching a formal investigation into your conduct." Ms. Whitmore's eyes widened in shock. She opened her mouth to protest, but found herself at a loss for words. Dr. Carter stood, smoothing her blazer. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Whitmore. I trust you'll cooperate fully with the investigation." As Dr. Carter left the room, the faint sound of murmured voices from the hallway reached her ears. Students and teachers alike were beginning to take notice. The door closed behind Dr. Carter, leaving Ms. Whitmore alone in the conference room, her confident facade shattered. The investigation was only the beginning, and the consequences of her actions were about to unfold. The investigation into Ms. Whitmore's grading practices began immediately. Dr. Carter, meticulous and methodical, approached the matter with the seriousness it deserved. She reviewed every piece of evidence available, grading records, rubrics, and even past parent-teacher meeting notes. The deeper she delved, the clearer the pattern became. Jaden wasn't the only student affected. Over the years, Ms. Whitmore's bias had left a trail of inequity. Students of color, especially those in advanced classes, were consistently graded lower than their white peers. In some cases, grades had even been altered after being submitted, a blatant attempt to skew records. Dr. Carter sat in her office, a thick file of evidence spread out before her. The school's guidance counselor, Mr. Patel, knocked lightly on the open door. "Vanessa, do you have a minute?" "Of course." Dr. Carter said, gesturing for him to sit. "I've been meaning to talk to you about Ms. Whitmore," Mr. Patel began. "I've had students, mostly students of color, come to me over the years saying they felt targeted in her class. I always tried to intervene where I could, but—" He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. Dr. Carter gave him a reassuring look. "It's not your fault. The system failed these kids, but we're going to fix it." With Mr. Patel's insights and the mounting evidence, Dr. Carter compiled a detailed report and presented it to the school board. The board members listened intently as Dr. Carter laid out her findings. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief filled the room when she revealed the full extent of Ms. Whitmore's actions. The news spread quickly. By the following morning, whispers of the investigation had turned into an uproar. Parents gathered outside the school, demanding answers. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a critical moment for Jefferson High School. Several students, emboldened by the attention, came forward with their own stories of mistreatment. One of them was Sophia Morales, a shy junior who had always excelled in math and science, but struggled in Ms. Whitmore's history class. "She told me my English wasn't good enough to understand the material," Sophia said during a school meeting. "But I was born here. English is my first language." Another student, Caleb Johnson, shared how Ms. Whitmore had humiliated him in front of the class after he mispronounced a word during a presentation. "She said, 'Maybe you should stick to sports,' like I wasn't smart enough to be in her class," Caleb recalled, his voice trembling with emotion. Dr. Carter attended each of these meetings, her presence a calming influence amidst the chaos. She listened intently, taking notes and reassuring parents and students alike that justice would be served. Meanwhile, Ms. Whitmore was reeling. The once confident teacher now avoided the hallways, her usual air of superiority replaced by palpable anxiety. She claimed she was being unfairly targeted, sending a flurry of emails to the school board in her defense. "It's a witch hunt," she insisted during a tense meeting with Dr. Carter and the board. "I've always held my students to high standards. If some of them couldn't meet those standards, that's not my fault." Dr. Carter remained calm, her voice unwavering. "High standards are one thing, Ms. Whitmore, but your grading records show a clear pattern of bias. This isn't about holding students accountable. It's about fairness and equity, which you failed to uphold." The final blow came when Dr. Carter revealed undeniable proof. Emails from Ms. Whitmore to a colleague, mocking certain students and admitting to grading them more harshly. The room fell silent as the board members read the damning messages. "I believe that's all we need to hear," the board president said, her tone icy. "Ms. Whitmore will be making our decision shortly." Dr. Carter left the meeting with a quiet determination. While the board debated Ms. Whitmore's fate, she was already planning the next steps to ensure lasting change at Jefferson High. The decision came swiftly. Ms. Whitmore was removed from her teaching position and placed under review by the state's Department of Education. Her classroom, once a space of fear and tension for many students, now stood empty. The day she left Jefferson High was somber. Students watched from windows and hallways as Ms. Whitmore walked to her car, her head held high despite the murmurs of disapproval surrounding her. "She had it coming," Marcus muttered to Jaden as they stood by their lockers. Jaden nodded but felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, he couldn't help but wonder how things might have been different if Ms. Whitmore had treated all her students fairly. Dr. Carter, however, was focused on the future. She convened a meeting with the school's faculty, outlining a new vision for Jefferson High. "This incident has highlighted the need for systemic change," she said, her voice resolute. "We will be implementing mandatory bias training for all staff, as well as creating a support network for students who feel marginalized or unheard." The staff listened attentively, many nodding in agreement. Mr. Patel, in particular, expressed his gratitude. "This is exactly what we need, Vanessa. Thank you for leading the charge." Dr. Carter also introduced new initiatives aimed at empowering students, including peer mentorship programs and workshops on leadership and advocacy. For Jaden, the changes were transformative. With Ms. Whitmore gone, he found himself thriving in his history class. His new teacher, Mr. Sinclair, encouraged creativity and critical thinking, making the subject more engaging than ever. One day, Mr. Sinclair announced an essay contest, sponsored by the local historical society. Jaden poured his heart into his submission, writing about his experience with bias and the resilience it had taught him. When the winners were announced, Jaden was stunned to hear his name called. He stood on stage at the awards ceremony, holding his plaque with pride as the audience applauded. "This essay isn't just about me," he said during his acceptance speech. "It's about all the students who've ever felt overlooked or underestimated. We deserve to be seen, heard, and treated with respect." The story culminated in a school assembly where Dr. Carter addressed the entire Jefferson High community. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as students, parents, and staff filled the seats. Dr. Carter stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet warm. "This school has faced a difficult chapter," she began, her voice steady. "But from difficulty comes growth. Today, we stand together to reaffirm our commitment to fairness, equity, and unity." She spoke about the importance of accountability, urging everyone to reflect on their own actions and biases. Her words resonated deeply, leaving many in the audience moved to tears. As the assembly ended, Jaden joined his mother on stage, receiving a standing ovation from his peers. It was a moment of triumph, not just for him, but for the entire Jefferson High community. Jefferson High School had entered a new era, one defined by inclusivity and hope. Dr. Carter's leadership and Jaden's resilience had sparked a school-wide transformation, proving that even in the face of injustice, positive change was possible. Thank you for joining us on this moving journey of resilience, accountability, and hope. Jaden's story reminds us that even when faced with systemic obstacles, the courage to speak up and fight for fairness can create ripples of change. It's a powerful lesson about the importance of standing together and refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice. If this story inspired you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what resonated most with you. And don't forget to tell us where you're listening from. We value every single member of our community. Make sure to subscribe to Hopeful Horizon and hit that bell icon so you never miss another impactful story. We'll be back soon with more tales that challenge the mind, stir the soul, and ignite the will to create a better world. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay determined, and always stand for what's right.